It always started the same way. I was walking through the city, doing nothing special. Just moving, drifting, thinking. It could be any city. Brick walls, flickering neon, crosswalks that blink too fast. The kind of place where people don't look up, where no one meets your eyes. I don't even remember where I was going. I never do. But then something would go wrong. A sound, a scream, the feeling of the air changing, too still or too hot, or just wrong. Sometimes it was subtle, a flicker in the reflection of a window, a shape too tall standing in the alley. Sometimes it was obvious. Monsters, freak weather, a gang of men with bats and stitched smiles, moving too smoothly, like puppets trying to be human. And every time, without thinking, I would run, but not far, just enough to get momentum. Then I'd jump, and I'd fly. Not like a superhero, not like a jet or a bird. It was more awkward at first, like a child pretending, arms stretched out, palms down. I'd flap once, maybe twice, and my feet would leave the ground. Slow, hesitant, like gravity was remembering it forgot me. But then I'd rise, above the sidewalk, past balconies, over power lines, above the city. I didn't understand it. I never trained for it. It wasn't something I discovered. I just always knew, in that strange, blurry way you know things in dreams. My body understood, my bones remembered, and no one else ever did. The first time I flew, I escaped a man with a face that wasn't finished. His mouth stretched up too far, his nose was drawn on like with marker. He followed me through the subway station, fingers twitching, whispering in a language that buzzed like insects. I tried to push through the turnstile, but it was jammed. The lights flickered. I turned around and he was closer, so I jumped. My shoulder clipped the railing. I almost fell, but the next flap lifted me over the ticket booth, up past the fluorescent lights, through the cracked ceiling tiles and into open air. I remember looking down and seeing his face staring up at me through the station roof, half hidden in shadow, still grinning. After that, I didn't walk the same way anymore. Every step felt like it could turn into a launch. I noticed more shadows, more wrong things. A child holding her mother's severed hand in a crosswalk, a car parked sideways on a building roof, a crowd of people clapping in silence, unmoving until I blinked. The city was broken. Or maybe I was. But I could fly. That was the difference. I tried to talk to someone once, a woman in a bookstore. She seemed normal, kind. She offered me coffee, and we sat near the window. I asked her casually if she ever felt like she was the only one reacting to things, like everyone else was missing something obvious. She smiled and said, "No, never." Then she blinked sideways. Literally. Her eyelids closed left to right, like a reptile. I spilled my coffee, backed out of the store, and when she stood, I took off. Just a little flap, a little skip, and I was over the street. She didn't chase me. She just watched, from behind the glass, like she was waiting. Sometimes I wondered if flying was a curse. Other people ran or screamed or froze. But I flew. And because of that, I was always alone. No one ever joined me. No one ever followed. The sky was mine. Cold, quiet, and empty. At first it was thrilling. Then it was lonely. Then it was normal. One night I flew higher than I ever had before. There was a storm coming, lightning curling upward instead of down. The buildings were melting at the edges, dripping concrete into the streets. People below were clapping again, that same silent rhythm. I didn't wait to see what it meant. I just ran and lifted off. The wind howled. Rain hit me like static, but I kept going. Upper, over the rooftops, above the towers, until the city below looked like a circuit board, and for the first time, I saw something else in the sky. Not a bird, not a plane. Someone, far ahead, flying. I followed them, the figure in the sky, the only other one I'd ever seen up there with me. They were just a blur at first, barely visible through the clouds, but unmistakably moving like I did. Wings of muscle and will, not feathers or engines. I pushed upward, feeling the burn in my shoulders, the resistance of air thickening the higher I rose. It wasn't easy. Flying never was. It was like fighting something invisible that wanted me to stay grounded, but I'd gotten used to the resistance, learned how to lean into it. They didn't look back, not even once. Just kept moving, slow and deliberate, like they were guiding me without saying so. I followed across rooftops, over districts I didn't recognize, parts of the city that looked unfinished, like sketches someone gave up on. Whole blocks with no doors, no people, just walls with painted-on windows and signs that read "placeholder" in all caps. I never noticed this part of the city before, and maybe that was the point. Maybe I wasn't meant to. Eventually they stopped. Not landed, just stopped. Floating in mid-air above a building shaped like a sundial, the roof cracked down the middle. I hovered a few feet behind them, breathing hard. My shoulders ached. My head throbbed. They turned. It was a woman. Or at least, she looked like one. She had no wings, no jetpack. Just arms folded across a black jacket, long hair tied back, and eyes that didn't blink. I couldn't tell her age. She looked timeless, in that way dreams make you forget numbers. She looked at me like she already knew everything I was about to ask. "You're not supposed to be here yet," she said. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. No anger, just truth. "I don't even know where here is," I replied. "Exactly." She turned again and pointed to the city below. "See it? See how broken it is? You weren't meant to stay long enough to notice." "What do you mean?" "This place is made to fall apart when you stop pretending. That's what cities are. Ideas, systems, rooms in your head you rent out to strangers. You've stayed too long. That's why the cracks are showing." I didn't understand her, but I felt like I should. "Why can I fly?" I asked. She smiled. Not with her mouth, just her eyes. "Because you never agreed to stay on the ground." She started drifting away again, but I moved with her this time, beside her, not behind. For the first time, flying didn't feel like escape. It felt like a question, and she was the answer, floating just out of reach. "Are there more of us?" I asked. "No," she said. "There were. A few. But most chose to forget." "Forget what?" "That they had wings. That they could leave. That this place isn't real." We flew silently for a while after that, across the edge of the city, where the buildings thinned out and the sky felt wider. Below, people moved like shadows, some with faces, most without. A man stared at a vending machine that spat out teeth instead of drinks. A woman chased a floating clock that never ticked. No one looked up. No one ever looked up. The woman with me glanced down at them and then back at me. "They don't fly because they don't believe falling is worth it. You, though, you kept jumping, even when you didn't know why." Was that wrong? Number. It was honest. I felt something in her words, like a thread tugging at the edge of my mind. "Am I dreaming?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Not yet." What does that mean? But she was already gone. No noise, no burst of speed, just not there anymore. I hovered for a while, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the feeling that I was closer to something, some truth, some answer that had always been in my chest, waiting to be named. Below me, the city kept shifting. A street folded in on itself. A bus drove into a wall and vanished. A child stepped into a puddle and never came back up. But I didn't look down anymore. I looked ahead. Because now I wasn't the only one who could fly. I just had to figure out why I was still here. After she vanished, I tried to find her again. Every time I flew, I searched the sky for that black jacket, for the sharp stillness she carried like armor. But I never saw her again. Not really. Once I thought I caught a glimpse, a silhouette between rooftops, gone before I could change direction. Another time I found her reflection in a skyscraper window, but when I turned to face her, the glass was empty. It felt like she wasn't hiding from me. She was waiting for me to understand something first. So I kept flying, and I kept watching. I began noticing patterns. People who were almost like me, but not quite. They didn't fly, but they hesitated, just for a second, before walking into the strange parts of the city. Like they saw the cracks too. A man stared too long at a puddle that reflected stars instead of streetlights. A woman followed an alley that led nowhere, and when she turned around, the entrance was gone. I approached one of them, a guy about my age with a nervous look, standing outside a restaurant that had no walls, just floating chairs and a glowing menu. "Do you see it?" I asked. He looked at me, confused. "See what?" "The glitch." He looked around. Then he laughed awkwardly. "Man, this city's always weird. It's just the vibe." "Have you ever flown?" That made him blink. "What?" "Have you ever tried?" "Tried what?" I stepped back, gave myself space, and lifted into the air. I didn't shoot up, just hovered slowly, a few feet above the ground. People passed without noticing. A woman bumped into me, looked irritated, and kept walking. But he saw. He backed up, eyes wide. "Holy shit," he whispered. "You could do this too," I said. "You just have to let go." He shook his head. "That's not possible." "But you saw it." "I saw you, not me." He turned and walked away fast, like he could outrun what he'd seen. I didn't follow. I hovered for a while longer, alone in a crowd that didn't look up. That's when I realized some people couldn't fly, not because they lacked the ability, but because they couldn't accept that the rules were broken. They stayed grounded because the ground, no matter how twisted, still felt familiar. Safe. They stayed because flying meant admitting nothing here was real. That night, I found an old building, an art gallery, or maybe a school. It didn't matter. Inside were canvases nailed to the walls, all blank, all humming. I touched one, and images poured into my mind. Not painted images, memories, people I used to know, places that maybe existed once. A girl on a rooftop, a classroom where the ceiling was a lake, a hallway that echoed with laughter that wasn't mine. The canvas burned with it. Not heat, memory. The more I touched, the more I remembered. Not just who I was, but how I got here. Or didn't. Because maybe I'd never left. The gallery melted around me. The walls dripped into the floor rose like smoke, and suddenly I was flying again. Only this time not because I had to escape, but because I was drawn forward. The sky opened above me, not dark, but silver and pulsing, like a heartbeat waiting to welcome me through. As I climbed, I heard voices below. Some crying, some singing, some just breathing. Not everyone was ready to fly. But I was. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone anymore. There was a point where the city ended. I had always assumed it stretched forever, like most dreams do. Just one strange street after another. But one night, after flying higher than I ever dared before, I saw it. A horizon above the sky. Not space, not stars, not clouds. A ceiling. Pale and smooth, glowing faintly, stretching in every direction like a dome flipped upside down. It didn't make sense. Sky wasn't supposed to have walls, but this place, it had limits. I drifted up slowly, like a swimmer rising to the surface of a deep lake, my arms pulling through the heavy air. The higher I got, the quieter everything became. I could no longer hear the distant city sounds. No footsteps, no sirens, no laughter. Just breathe. My own. And something else. A hum. Faint. Constant. Like the resonance of a tuning fork. It didn't come from the city. It came from the ceiling itself. I reached it and hovered, staring. It wasn't solid in the way stone is solid. It shimmered when I touched it. My fingers passed through, not into empty space, but into something warmer. Like dipping your hand into light. And then I felt her. The woman in black. She wasn't beside me, but her presence was. Like she was inside the sky itself. "This is where most stop," her voice said, and it echoed directly in my bones. "Some choose to turn back. Others stay here forever, afraid of what comes next." "What is it?" I asked aloud, not caring that no one could hear me. "Truth," she answered. I floated there for a while, hand inside the light, chest rising and falling like I was still learning how to breathe. "Why me?" I asked. "You kept flying," she said, "even when it hurt, even when it made no sense. You didn't fly to escape. You flew to find out what was real." I pulled my arm back, but the warmth lingered in my skin. "Am I dreaming?" She didn't answer, not this time. But I knew. I dove back down. Not because I wanted to leave, but because there were still people below. Still places I hadn't seen. As I descended, the city looked different. Brighter, more alive. Streets that had once twisted and faded now pulsed with color and structure. People moved with purpose. A few even looked up. One or two even waved. I hovered above a playground I'd passed many times before. It had always been empty. Now children were playing. Not like normal children. They glowed faintly. Their laughter echoed like music. One of them looked at me, lifted her hand, and jumped. For a moment, just a moment, she hovered, then landed again, giggling. The others tried. None flew, but none were afraid either. They were learning. Later that night, I flew to the outskirts, to where the buildings stopped forming and the city gave way to fields of fog. I hovered there, watching the grey roll across the horizon like waves of sleep. I wondered how many others had reached the ceiling and turned back. I wondered how many had never even tried. And I wondered what waited beyond the light. Back in the center of the city, something new had formed. A tower that hadn't been there before. It was tall, spiraled like a shell, and at the very top was a platform with no railings, just a flat circle of stone suspended in the sky. I landed there one morning as the city pulsed with quiet light. The woman in black stood waiting for me. "You're close," she said. "Close to what?" "To waking up." I blinked. "This is a dream?" "In a way." "Then what's real?" She smiled. "That's the wrong question." I looked out at the sky, at the city below, at the people trying to fly, and I thought I finally understood. The right question was, what will I do when I know the truth? And I knew the answer. The morning I decided to leave, the city felt still, not dead, just waiting. It no longer pulsed or bent. It breathed, calm and quiet, like it knew something was ending or beginning. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I wasn't even sure I needed to. There was no one left I truly spoke to. Not in words, only in looks, in silence, in the way we sometimes met eyes mid-air and nodded like we understood what it meant to be ungrounded. I returned to the ceiling in the sky, the glowing surface above everything. My fingers remembered how it felt, like the first warmth of sunlight after a long storm. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for answers. I passed through. I expected something, a flash, a voice, a memory. Instead, I got peace. It wasn't empty beyond the sky. It wasn't heaven. It wasn't void. It was space, but space filled with motion and light and soft sound, like an endless dream that finally admitted it was dreaming. I floated forward, not flying exactly, but being carried, as if the world had turned into water and I'd become breath itself. She was there too, the woman, but she didn't speak. She just flew beside me, not guiding, just being. And around us, others appeared. People I'd never seen, but somehow recognized. People like me. People who flew. We didn't need names. We didn't need questions. We just rose together, like we always had, but never realized. Below, the city faded. Not in destruction, but in distance, like a story ending in soft light. I thought about everything I'd run from. The monsters. The twisted faces. The clapping crowds. The strange, broken world of streets and shadows. And I realized none of it had ever been chasing me. It had just been waiting for me to leave. I'd spent so long asking why I could fly. Now I knew. because I wasn't meant to stay on the ground, because I was never supposed to believe the city was all there was, because somewhere, somehow, I remembered how to let go. This wasn't the end, not of the dream, not of the story, not of the self, just the end of falling and the beginning of the flight that never ends.